All right. Hello and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. We have a very special webinar for you today. My name is Tyler Shields, Principal Analyst at Enterprise Strategy Group, now a part of Omdia Research. And I have with me here a fantastic subject matter expert that we're going to be speaking with today, Robin Das. Robin is the Executive Director, Market Growth Strategist at DataBee, a Comcast company. And we're talking about a really cool and interesting topic today, which is the evolution of the security data fabric. One of my favorite topics. I love this discussion. There's so much meat behind this discussion. I don't think we can cover nearly half of it in the 30 minutes that we have allotted, but we're going to give it a go. So, Robin, I want to open with just a level setting question for the audience. So let's start with the basics. Can you help me define what exactly is a security data fabric and why are we talking about it now? I have my views on what this is, but as a true creator of this type of technology, I'd love to hear how you define it.
Thanks. It's great to be here. And yeah, we're going to have to talk very quickly if we're going to cover all the information in the time allotted. But yeah, just to start with the basics. When I think about a security data fabric, I don't think of it as being a tool or a solution. I think of it more as an architecture or an approach to data. And that's thinking about sort of, you know, the current situation that we find ourselves in. And so that's really paying attention to the fact we need to kind of ingest our data. We need to normalize it. We need to have it in some sort of centralized storage. And then once it's in that centralized storage, it acts as this single source of truth or this single well that the organization kind of can draw from. It sort of solves some of the challenges about like, well, what is this data and where does it come from and is it accurate or not? And to sort of maybe pull on the thread of like why we sort of almost like need it now. I think over the past few years, in response to the biggest and baddest threats, we've continually sort of invest in these latest and greatest point solutions, right, for the enterprise, because you want to have, the right tool to kind of combat the right threat. And so this investment in point solutions over the past few years has kind of really led to this element of tool sprawl. And that in turn has led an element of data sprawl as these tools all produce data, but they produce their own data within their specific formats and in their specific places. And if you think about that, that data has a gravity. And so part of the approach of a security data fabric is to kind of relieve that and sort of to move the gravity from being at the extreme where the solutions are to more like a centralized location.
Yeah, no, that's very interesting. I know according to ESG research, 93% of organizations are increasing cybersecurity budgets right now. And I think that is a supporting point to your discussion about tool sprawl. We have way too many tools. ESG data also shows that the majority of enterprises that we speak to have, I believe it's 10 or 12 or more cybersecurity tools in their SOC alone, which goes to show you that there's just a significant problem of tool sprawl. And when we hear that consistently from CISOs that we speak to, so how do we believe that the future is a platform then, or do we believe that the future will remain tools that lay on top of a set of data? Kind of where do we believe? Do we believe that there's a platform storyline beginning to come out here?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really great question, like the difference and sort of when you think about number one, just the challenges with having the 10 to 12 tools. That's a bunch of pivoting. That's a bunch of learning new tools. Like that puts an sort of fair burden, I think, on the SOC. And then with regards to like the platform, I think there's an interesting debate to be had of do you meet the customer where they are, or do you meet sort of the security organization where they are with the tools? Do you think about a platform? I think there's going to be multiple answers to this, and I don't think there's ever going to be a platform that covers everything, and you're going to buy security data fabric in a box, because I think you're still going to have the tools, and I think there are solutions available that can kind of almost like um, ease that journey. And maybe the way to think about it is we minimize the platforms or we minimize the burden. So it's not going to end up being a single platform because it's that single. I think sometimes people will say like we just need a single pane of glass, right? But if you think about the size of that piece of glass, it would be massive. and different people want to look at different things, and the glass is going to be different. And so I think, I don't think there could ever be like the one platform. Just to give it sort of a really concrete example, you know, compliance and auditors might want to look at things through the lens of a Tableau dashboard or a BI tool versus a SOC analyst who's going to be sort of heavily into a SIM such as a Splunk. And so I don't think there can ever be like the one platform. I think what you do is, again, it's back to this sort of idea of an architecture or a way of thinking about the data is that we've kind of created the single source of truth, the single well from which you draw from. And whether you're drawing it in a bucket or you're using it with a faucet and a glass, that will be how you interact with it. But at the end of the day, you still have this, well that is clean and pristine.
So, Robin, I want to talk about the components that go into a cybersecurity fabric, specifically the data that gets pulled together. We at ESG, I've written some pieces around cybersecurity data fabrics, and I talk about the connection between vulnerability data, asset state data, and threat data, kind of put into a soup, mixed together. And what comes out of it is no longer individual components, but a good flavor, a context, right? That people can use. Where does cybersecurity data fabrics, where do they get access to that data? How do they pull that data in? How does that work?
Yeah, and actually, I would love to sort of jump back on one thing about, you were talking about these three data sets, but I think, we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about the power of the data fabric of as you are almost like able to store data for cheaper than traditional SIM-based methods, there isn't actually, you can add a lot more flavor to your soup now because, you aren't limited by like, oh, is this going to be too voluminous? You can kind of expand the realm, number one, of what you want to sort of pull in because it is a little bit cheaper. And so I think that's sort of an important point to talk about. And then, to your point about how it works, I think the thing that we've seen that it has been really successful is sort of having this concept of an entity, right? Whether that's a person, whether that's an asset, whether that's an application, and the beauty, if you do this properly, is you start to stitch together all these different ways of thinking about an asset or an entity or a person, and you're pulling in those data sets. But as you're pulling them in, as you have them in this standardized schema, as you have sort of a singular concept of what they are, you'll be able to sort of create this almost like timeline with all this rich context per asset, per person, per application. And so I think that's the way in which people are then sort of able to interact with it. And I think that's almost like the sort of the revolutionary sort of concept that sometimes does get lost is that you're not having to, every time you do this, you're not having to start from scratch and be like, okay, I'm trying to pull everything I know about Tyler. All right, like how do I stitch together Tyler? And then, you've done that, and that's a one-off. And then the next time you have to think about Robin. Okay, and now let me pull everything I know about Robin. Like versus like with a security data fabric, it's already kind of steadily stitching together everything I know about Tyler and everything I know about Robin and everything I know about Jack and everything I know about Jill, etc.
Yeah.
So I think that's the
There's
benefits.
there's so much power in that. There's so much power in that
Yeah.
context because I think any one data point when you hand it to an analyst is never really enough. And if you think about the day-to-day security analyst work that occurs, or any kind of cybersecurity work, it's not just here's a vulnerability, go fix it. It's here's a vulnerability that's actively being exploited with a weaponized exploit that has mitigating factors inside the infrastructure, and you have to flip through 6, 7, 8, 10 different dashboards to understand the prioritization of this. So talk to me a little bit about the core challenges, right? How are these challenges affecting security operations and decision making ability of security people?
Yeah, and sorry, even just one other quick thing is like not only have you figured all that piece out, but then who owns it and who's their
Yeah,
boss and who's their manager?
yeah.
If I,
And who
like
goes and
like
fixes
that's
it?
the yeah, who's responsible for fixing it? And so not only have I got all this context, and now I now need to kind of hunt and peck and figure out ownership. And again, like a small company that they're probably not going to see these types of challenges, but when you kind of get into the enterprise and that becomes larger and diffuse and the numbers become and there's edge cases, like that's the real challenge.
What are the top challenges CISOs face? And then how are they affecting the day-to-day lives of the people, right? You mentioned the ability to actually execute remediation. I mentioned prioritization. 52% of organizations right now plan to increase their staff dedicated to cybersecurity risk management. Over half of the enterprises that we speak to and survey say they have a problem. They have a data volume problem, right? So, I guess from the problem statement and the challenge statement side of this, uh, you know, I guess what are the key points that I would want to put in front of a CISO and say, look, you have this problem. Here's your challenge. Here's how we go fix it.
Yeah, and I think we sort of touched on it a little bit earlier with like when we were talking about the data. I mean, I think today the challenges are there are trade-offs, right? Like I'm going to decide on the depth and the breadth of my data because maybe it's a voluminous data set, so I'm bringing it in like on a weekly basis, but I know I can't store it for any significant period of time. Or maybe it's the types of data that I'm sort of bringing in. And so I think that's the first challenge is like I'm making trade-offs. I'm making decisions about the data I bring in, the data I don't bring in, and that okay, well, what's the so what with there? Is it just means you're just further away from sort of better visibility. I mean, the holy grail, I think, for any CISO is full visibility into what's kind of going on. I don't think realistic. I don't think we're ever going to get to full visibility. But like, if you're already making those trade-offs about data, like you're never going to get to that type of sort of visibility. So that's I think would say challenge number one. Challenge number two, like again, it's sort of no secret that the biggest challenge in cybersecurity is not enough alerts, right? It's too many alerts, right? Like everything's flashing red. You've got this dashboard, and on the console, and when everything's flashing red, where do you go to first? How do I prioritize? And really,
Yeah,
one of the ways that you can really sort of start to sort of dampen down that is by the cross correlation, right? Like it's too many false positives. So if I add additional data sets, additional pieces of context, can I either deprioritize certain alerts at the expense of others, or can I, even eliminate alerts? And again, that has a tangible benefit because every CISO you'll speak to, every SOC you'll speak to, I mean, alert fatigue is this thing that burns out our people, right? And so, if you can use the power of the data to kind of cross correlate that, then that's going to be great because you fewer false positives, minimize the alert fatigue, and sort of really cut through the noise and kind of get to the true signals. And then the other piece of it is the other flip side of the fatigue, I would say, is you know I mean, I'm not going to say that everyone's well paid, but we do all right in cybersecurity. But the money that we're getting, we're sort of doing these like low level tasks. Like, if you're cleaning up data, like what? Like, no, you want to be doing like higher level analysis. You want to be thinking about more sophisticated things, just from an intellectually stimulating perspective, just from a what am I getting paid a wage perspective. Like, it's just going to be if I'm spending my time just trying to clean up data, like that's going to burn me out as much as alert fatigue, right? Like I want to be intellectually stimulated. I want to hire people that want to solve cool, interesting,
sure.
challenging, probably all those things. Like those are the things I want, not a bunch of data cleaning.
Yeah. So that immediately makes me want to jump to the futures question, but I'm going to hold off and hold that for the end because that is
We'll get
the
there.
most exciting part, in my opinion, about what cybersecurity data fabrics bring to play. So we're going to push that out. But I wanted to double down a little bit on just to give you a couple of additional data points that ESG provides, right? We know that 38% of those surveyed struggled with vulnerability prioritization. And it's the exact issue that you're talking about, right? The ability to say that this vulnerability, which may be a code level AppSec vulnerability in a specific container in the cloud, is more or less prioritized than this, SaaS risk identity problem that's sitting in a third party SaaS vendor. Like, how do you, it's totally apples and oranges when you're trying to compare those without context, right? And I think that's the part of what a rich data fabric allows you to do is to connect those values.
And you can't add the context unless you have the data in the one place and a consistent way of thinking about the data, a consistent way of like naming the data. I mean, and the whole point is you don't even to that point, again, I think it's a great point that you made. Like, you don't even want the context on a one-off basis, because you're not looking at like one apple and one orange. You're looking at trucks full of apples,
Yeah. Yeah.
trucks full of oranges, a bunch of pineapples, maybe a
Yep.
mango. Like, there's so much. And like, unless you've got this kind of, I mean, call it like, I don't know. I'm gonna stretch this analogy until you say uncle. But like, unless you can kind of look at like the cost per kilogram or the cost per pound, or you have an
Yeah.
accurate weighing scale to like weigh these things, like how are you gonna ever get there?
Yeah, I mean, you can even like throw in there like healthcare systems facing unique challenges with legacy systems and
Yes.
financial services maybe being highly mature in risk management, but maybe lack infrastructure. Like, there's so many different ways you could slice that data that you know. I think one of the things that having a rich fabric that unifies different silos of technology. A, it allows you to have prioritization that crosses those silos. B, it allows the human side of it to become more automated and richer, right? So, in your opinion, in your eyes, then, do we believe that cybersecurity data fabrics relieve some of the? It feels to me like they relieve some of the day to day analysis that your level one and even level two have to do by connecting all of these disparate storylines.
Yeah, 100%. Like, I think it eases the burden, from a human perspective, but then at the same time sort of frees them up to do the more interesting. When I say interesting, like the more strategic ways of thinking. Like, our adversaries are sort of coming at us, and like no one's ever going to say like the threat landscape's getting better, right? Like, it's just the volume of threats, just kind of continue to increase, and so does it enable, the analysts, the Rumsfeld matrix of like the known knowns and the sort of known unknowns. But like, does it really enable, in an ideal world, we're thinking about the unknown unknowns, and like, how do we kind of get our arms around that type of stuff? And again, and there's no way that you're going to get your arms around that type of stuff if you're spending your entire time cleaning up a bunch of data sets and doing this very manual, sort of labor intensive work. It's
Yeah. Do
either
you
you're, yeah.
do you have any specific outcomes or metrics that you're aware of that should be focused on when implementing one of these? Meaning, we may have five, six, 10 isolated tools that have their own data sets that they look at and give you results from. What should a SOC leader, a CISO, a technology leader, a CTO, what should they be looking for from a metric standpoint or even just an outcome standpoint if we don't have individual line metrics that we could say, look, hey, board, we improved this by implementing a cybersecurity data fabric that breaks down these silos?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, right? If you don't, measure it, how can you manage it? I think there's an element of, not necessarily sort of taking the horse before the cart, but I think there's probably an element of like, what are the outcomes you want to drive, and what are the outcomes that are important, and maybe sort of thinking about how the security data fabric will like enable that. I mean, to your point, like about vulnerability and asset, right? Like, if you know the data fabric isn't a tool, isn't an answer in of itself, it's the thing that helps you kind of get those metrics down, right? Like, so if that is the thing that's kind of keeping you up at night, well, okay, the data fabric is going to be able to help you answer that, because the data will sort of set you free, and so basically it's going to shorten that time that you have these open vulnerabilities. Like, it's going to shorten that time because it's going to give you, A, the ranking, B, the owners, sort of C, the sort of the bigger visibility. So I think that's always, I think, if we're being candid, like, that's probably some of the challenges, is the data fabric is so adaptable and so able to drive a bunch of outcomes in a bunch of different ways, that I think before anybody kind of goes on this journey, they kind of need to have a think, or a sense of, what are the outcomes that are
Sure.
important to me that
What
I
is the
want to
use case you're
drive.
trying to solve?
Exactly, right? Like, what am I? And so, and again, if sort of compliance is the thing that you care about, and continuous controls monitoring is a thing, like, well, then, yeah, a data fabric is going to help you. Or actually, a data fabric is definitely going to help you, because it's going to be able to suck in all that data, and it's going to make this continuous sort of, give you this continuous, up to the minute view of the world, and then that's going to be the outcome that you want to drive. Like I think the outcome, I mean, the data fabric is think of the data fabric less as a thing that does X and more of this sort of I don't know, it's sort of lubricant or this like that makes the engine run more effectively. That's why I think we sort of talk about it being an architecture and less about a singular platform, a singular technology. It's more about a more evolved view of your data and a view of your security tools.
Yeah, I love it. It feels like you're describing it as a foundational component to building a cybersecurity program on top of, which is what I
Correct.
agree 100%. Right? That's kind of the ultimate version of what you would want to come out with this. So if we think of if we go back to the design of a cybersecurity fabric, we have this data set where we talk about all the different contextual pieces. And I love that you took it beyond the three that I had, because like you could even go so far as to say, hey, let's connect our cybersecurity fabric to our HR system and get a
Yes.
understanding of organizational structure. Let's connect it to our classification system that classifies our data sets to actually provide a richer view into business value of a particular entity or asset, right? So I love that, and that provides that contextual soup that we talked about. So that's the foundational component. What you layer on top of that is often a analysis engine of some sort that analyzes that data and provides an outcome, right? And today those analysis engines are syntactical. They do lookups, they do queries, they are very programmable, extensible. We also have ML and AI overlays into that data set to look at it in a holistic way. But if we take that output and we look at the actual output that's coming from it, I kind of classify it into a few different values that a cybersecurity framework drives. Value number one is visibility, right? Knowing what you've got and the current state of that entity or asset. What does it look like today? Value number two is the ability to fix things faster because you can actually see what the current state is. You can see what the risk is, the business risk, and you can quantify that and make better prioritization decisions. So you get visibility, improved priority, and the ability to say this is more important than that. And then the outcome of remediation may be today a ticketing system, but in the future, potentially even AI driven automated remediation and things like that, which we will get to in a second. Um, let's talk for a second on the technology evolution. Okay. There's an ongoing debate about what I call BYOF, bring your own fabric, versus integrated platforms. We talked a little bit about this at the top of the hour. Um, what's your perspective on this? Like, should we be building as a practitioner? Should I be building my own fabric? Should I be buying a fabric? Should I be buying a platform that has a fabric underneath it that unifies a subset of tools? What should the buyer, the CISO, the enterprise security team be looking for within a fabric like that?
Yeah, and great question. I think step number one is for the CISO to sort of see where they sit, right? And what I mean by that is, I think, look, you probably have, you have your large, mega, giant enterprises, right? A lot of resources, a lot of budget, a lot of expertise. I think, and then you have slightly smaller enterprises. And so, if we take that first segment first, yeah, they have resources, they have smart people, they have engineers that could probably build it. I think of this as a trade-off between where you want to spend your time and effort, right?
I've seen
If
the builds fail massively left and right for what it's worth, right? I've seen major companies with
yeah,
extremely smart people attempt to build this and then come back and buy it after 12 to 18 months. They realize how hard it is.
and it's the experience curve, and yeah, and some of them will succeed, some of them don't. And again, it's like you're having to sort of pivot your organization. You have to hire sort of a bunch of data engineers that are going to write connectors, that are going to custom connectors. And so number one, that's the challenge is a, you have to build it. The attacks are happening now, but okay, let's pretend you guys can do it super fast. Okay, you've built this kind of monolith that's a bunch of custom sort of connectors and stuff like that. Well, guess what? Our engineers generally love to build stuff. What engineers really hate to do is to document stuff and maintain it And and so it's that kind of idea of like, okay, so if you have the resources, great, but is this going to give you a management challenge? Well, it's going to give you a management challenge immediately because you've got to find these people and hire these people and find the tech and hire the tech and do all that stuff. And then call it like 2 years from now, 5 years, three down the road, how I've just kind of created another problem for myself or my organization because I have to manage this thing and I have to manage the APIs that might change and custom connectors might, the data sets might change. So I think that's the challenge for the CISO that's sitting in like a large enterprise. I think, for a smaller enterprise, again, maybe a bit more resource constrained. Again, definitely, a bunch of smart people working for them, but like that's where it's again to think about, well, what are the outcomes you want to drive. And so I think that's the piece of it. It's just a trade-off.
Sure.
And it's like, well, yeah, like you could build your own power generator to generate your own electricity, but you don't. We're very happy using like AWS and other
Sure.
hyperscalers, because we're not trying to manage our own server farm. So I think it's just like a resource trade-off. And so I think there's plenty of good options out there. And again, I don't think it's like this one platform to rule them all. Like I think you just have to think about where you are, but then really think about like, well, when I say I'm going to build a data fabric, it sounds straightforward, but what am I really signing up for? And then that's where sort of the devil's in the details of understanding who owns the data, and even just to sort of think about, sort of the idea of that there's a lot of so even sort of the data model, right? There's a lot of people that will die on a lot of small hills as to how the data should be standardized or not standardized, or and so that in of itself is going to take months of beating heads together in a conference room versus like if you sort of are buying more of an off the shelf tool, hopefully the company that you're buying this from has thought about the standardized data or thought about the portability of data and thought, given some thought to those types of things.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I know some of our research at ESG has shown that 76% of folks plan to increase usage of AI in their cyber risk management programs. It feels to me like this is the foundational component that really enables AI to become extremely powerful because AI lives on context, right? So, can you give us a little bit of color on how AI is changing the game in cybersecurity data management?
Yeah, and I would think of, whenever you hear the words AI, there's probably two cliches that are sort of ever present that we should always use. And the reason that cliches is so good, obviously, there is garbage in, garbage out, and sort of to that point, like, and again, I'm not going to bet against the AI, right? And so eventually, the AI is going to kind of figure out how to clean and standardize and normalize the data, like anything a human can do. Like at some point, the AI is going to figure out to do. But like, why make life hard for the AI? So to that point of like, if there are companies or there are patterns that have already kind of cleaned up the data, like why just waste the AI's time? And when I
Sure.
say waste the AI's time, it's wasting your enterprise's time and effort and money on getting this model spun up. Where so that's the first thing is like, the security data fabric can kind of provide that foundational layer instead of getting the AI to now recreate a foundational layer. Basically, what you do is like enable the AI to then use this foundational layer to kind of go find these other hidden correlations. And then the second thing is like this horses for courses, again, playing on this idea of that second cliche of like, there's going to be some things and some pieces of context that AI is actually not going to be great at. Right? Like I've been reading this thing about this healthcare device manufacturer, and then the Gen AI couldn't do the math, right? And so if they'd relied on the AI throughout their product, it would have killed people because it was going to do the math and it
Not
was doing
ready.
the wrong type of math.
Yeah.
But once, so they needed to kind of create like this upfront work that did the math on the blood work or the vitals. And once the math was done, great. Now you can kind of give to the Gen AI and do that. So I think those are the first two massive sort of caveats I think to have with AI is again garbage in, garbage out, and then like the horses for courses. And so yeah, don't make life additionally difficult for the AI. Don't just kind of throw the AI at it and be like AI is going to solve this, right? I think you need to be like thoughtful first, but then I think to your sort of bigger point about how AI is going to help, I think once the foundation is built, I think if you think about like the AI, like sort of the ever-present watchman, I think if you think about the data feeds and the quality of the feeds coming in, that's going to be an awesome place where the AI can kind of understand things like, it's going to have that context and be like, oh, hey, actually, I noticed these data feeds normally look like this and now they look like that. Let me reach out to the owner of that data feed and ask them, and then the owner of the data feed can give me the context. For example, for us, we use AI a lot around like asset ownership. Like it's a pain to kind of validate ownership, and again back to this thought of like this foundational layer. Have the agentic AI sort of go out and proactively double check on things, or if it sees things, if it sees assets without owners, or if it sees applications without owners, etc. Sort of go off and sort of ask those things, and then yeah, I mean, those are sort of almost just like easy wins, and then I think from there it kind of only grows on the ability to kind of take more action to sort of understand similar patterns. Whether it's vulnerability management, it can kind of start to understand, okay, here's the vulnerabilities, let me either go off and proactively patch them, let me kind of pull them
Okay.
up and say I'm ready to go patch, please let like I think that's the areas that it really kind of
Now
wins.
you're talking really amazing futures, right? This is where an analyst loves to make bets, right? Um, so I'm going to double click on that in a second, but I want to get practical for today, and then we'll
Yeah.
end on the dream state, right? We'll end on the
Yeah, let's go practical and then we go
let's go
crazy.
practical first. So, you in our preparation call that we did together, you used a term that I had never heard before, which I absolutely love. I'm going to use it everywhere, and it was basically what practical steps should organizations take to prevent their data lakes from becoming data swamps. What is a data swamp? And like just real quickly, in like a couple, two or three very grounded practical recommendations, how do we avoid having a data swamp in our enterprise?
Yeah, and so one of the reasons I think we sort of talked about that a little bit is I think we're talking about data fabric, and there's so many data qualifiers. Right? We have data fabric, we have data lakes, we have data warehouses, sort of lighthouses. The idea is that like there's this thing called the tragedy of the commons in sort of economic literature, which is basically if you have a resource that's a communal resource, if you don't have any sort of guardrails or ownership, or a way of making sort of any externalities sort of owned, it soon gets overfished or overgrazed, or in the case of a data lake, becomes a swamp as people just dump everything in there.
Got it.
And so I think the point about a data lake is it's I think a data lake could have been a security data fabric if we didn't have the tragedy of the commons, right? Which maybe we're kind of going off on too much of a tangent, but like essentially the whole point is with data lake, to kind of keep it pristine and clear, you need things like governance. You need sort of a standardized schema. You
Sure.
need sort of ways of bringing in the data in a consistent manner. You need people double checking that the data is coming in a consistent manner. And so that's why you need sort of people and process before you kind of get to technology. And so to prevent a data lake from becoming a data swamp, you need sort of good governance. You need sort of a standardized schema so people aren't just kind of throwing in a bunch of different data. And so somehow, like sometimes with you know a data fabric, it kind of gives you that by not it kind of gives you that by default, right? Like so if you've really thought about a data fabric, it means you've already thought about governance and you've figured out like, okay, who owns data set A, data set B, data set C, and like what are the things I'm looking for, and like how am I going to map this in a standardized way. And then that is when the promise of the data lake really does kind of sort of kick off, is because it's like, okay, the data lake now is that maybe coming back to that original analogy, this kind of clear wellspring, we can kind of feed everything from it. It's this single source of truth that is clean and usable. And again, whether I'm using a bucket or whether I'm piping it into my house or however I'm then using it, at least I know that the lake itself is clean. So
Yeah, it's about being intelligent about what you put in it and how you put in it to ensure that the output is just as good. And I think that's the key
Yeah,
message there.
and then one of those things which is really easy for us, us sort of talking heads in a webinar to say, and in practice, very very hard to achieve. And so, how can you set yourself up for success by like having sort of that rigor around it? And like honestly, for me, I think one way is like a data fabric kind of makes you have that rigor because you have to kind of answer some of those
Yep.
questions.
I think that's absolutely wonderful. So, um, gosh, this conversation has been so amazing. Like, I feel like I could talk to you for an hour easy, but I want to wrap it up on my favorite question and my favorite topic, and that is, where do you see the technology evolving in the next few years? Specifically, let's assume that I'm an enterprise buyer and I buy into the vision of a cyber data fabric, a security data fabric, and I get it up and running and I'm pulling in all the pertinent data. It's pristine, it's clean, it's well organized, the system is running. Where does it go from here? And feel free to be futuristic, right? The Jetsons. What does the future look like for cybersecurity data fabrics? How do they work?
Well, so if we want to go like super white space, I think if we really want to get out there, I think I truly believe that cybersecurity can go from being a cost center to at least neutral or a revenue driver, right? Like, and what do I mean by that? Like, I generally think the cybersecurity teams, uh, if you think about the dependencies that are put on us, like bad guys are attacking us all the time, and they're only getting bigger and badder, and just the threats are sort of growing. And so I feel like cybersecurity teams in general are at the bleeding edge of like data and data management and having to think about data in a really timely manner, in a really effective manner. And so I think they almost like don't understand sort of like the engines. I feel like honestly, when it comes to data and data management, I feel like the the cybersecurity teams are creating Ferraris and everybody else is out there riding bicycles and they think the bicycles are fine because the marketing team when it comes to marketing operations probably doesn't have the same threats, right? Like it's just, oh, okay, we got the advertising campaign out. And so I really believe with the power of the data, the cybersecurity teams can sort of again expand the realm of what is possible with all this data because you're adding in context. The only thing that makes data security data is we're calling it security data, right?
Yeah.
And so, as an example, I mean, I think this is like one of the coolest things I've ever thought about. I was speaking to somebody, and they were an engineer, and they had an engineer that worked for them and could almost look at log files and predict when a system was about to kind of fail. I think of it as like a heart arrhythmia, right? Like before you have a heart attack, your heart's going to make these like off the things patterns. And I was like, brilliant. And I was like, that's so cool. And I feel like cybersecurity teams are like poised to kind of be able to sort of leverage that data. So again, you got to mission number one, you got to keep the business safe, right? You got to keep the business safe. And unfortunately, because of the scale of the threats, I think you need things like a data fabric to just keep yourself safe. But then number two, think of the other use cases and the other value add that you can kind of start to drive once you have all this data at the enterprise level with clean data, with context. Like again, you can begin to expand, the vision of what is possible with your security data fabric. And again, I think you could at least go from sort of a cost center to at least being neutral and honestly maybe sort of a revenue driver at some point. And again,
You
with it, yeah.
you are so on point. It's incredible. I mean, the only thing that I'm going to add to that is I'm a firm believer in 2025, 2026 being the years of agentic and agents. And what do agents need to survive, right? Agents need knowledge. Agents need context to make their decisions, to go do the things, the actions, right? And so I believe that in 2025, on top of these data fabrics, we're going to see the birth of and the start of self-healing systems, systems that have the breadth of knowledge built on cybersecurity data fabrics, IT data fabrics, business data fabrics, to make smart decisions both for the business, as you mentioned, but also for the peer remediation fact, right? And it's going to be a ramp People are going to freak out. People are going to be like, oh my gosh, we're not going to let this agent go and change our infrastructure configs. It's not going to happen until maybe that agent has recommended the same thing to them 500 times in 3 months. And they go, wait a minute, it is never wrong. It is always right. Let's just go ahead and check that auto remediation box. And so I think that that's what really excites me in the next couple of years.
Yeah, and just kind of playing off of that, like who is better poised to kind of think about sucking in all that data than the security teams, right? Like you talked about business,
That's correct.
it's not going to be coming. Look, I love HR, I guess, but it's not going to be coming from the human resources team because they're not going to have half that. It's not going to be coming from the finance team because they're not gonna, like you can like knock off the list the teams that are best poised to kind of take in all that data. From a couple of reasons. Number one, access to the data, and number two, the ability to manage all that data at the scale and pace that is needed because they have to do it for their day job. Well, look, you've just created sort of this Ferrari or choose your favorite sports engine analogy. You've just created this machine, right? And again, you can kind of keep the business safe, but there's no reason with sort of modern architectures where you can't start to think about like other ways in which you can kind of use that data. You're just limited by your imagination.
Robin, I'm going to end it on that point. That was an absolutely amazing conversation. Thank you so much for your time today and popping together to do this fireside chat with me. I'm really, really excited about the future of cybersecurity data fabrics. I think they're an underpinning of self-healing systems, of modern cybersecurity program approaches. I think we're going to see a continued, I think merging towards this view and vision. So thank you so much for your time today. I appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Tyler.